For more than a decade, Bertalan Meskó has been writing about a future in which technology fundamentally reshapes medicine. Now, with agentic systems, consumer wearables, and ChatGPT-style tools landing in clinical workflows, the future he sketched out years ago is arriving. We are now asking whether the digital transformation will make people healthier or just add new layers between doctor and patient, along with new costs. Hi, everyone. I'm David Williams, president of strategy consulting firm Health Business Group and host of the Health Biz podcast, where I interview top healthcare leaders about their lives and careers. My guest today, Dr. Bertalan Meskó, physician, geneticist, and founder of the Medical Futurist Institute. He's known to his global audience as the Medical Futurist, and he helps make sense of the technologies reshaping medicine. Bertalan, welcome to the Health Biz podcast.
Hi, David. Thank you so much, first of all, for having me. It's a wonderful podcast, and I was very much looking forward to it.
Outstanding. So you've been writing about the future of medicine since before most people had even heard the term digital health or even since before we were using that term. So I wonder, how did you become the medical futurist, and how have some of your early predictions panned out, especially because when you're talking about the future, if you live long enough, eventually you get to see it.
As a professional futurist, I always feel like I'm being poked with the expression prediction, but I will get into that. Very briefly, I knew exactly from the age of like 5 or 6 that I wanted to become a scientist. And my first decision was about going into medicine. So then I can become a clinical scientist. And genetics was my first love during my high school years. You know, we are talking about the late 1990s, early 2000 years, when genomics had a huge boom. The whole genome sequencing projects came out. The Human Genome Project was finished. So it was very exciting to get into that field. So even before I even finished medical school, 1.5 years before that, I already started my PhD program. And the whole PhD was about genomics. Our major aim was to find out if it's possible to predict the responsiveness to biological therapies in certain autoimmune conditions from a simple blood test using gene expression profiles. So it was very much life sciences and a big part of genomics. But as soon as I finished my PhD, I felt that something was missing from my research life. And that missing part was my geek self, which I've been, since being a kid. I've always worked and lived with technologies and devices. I had Amiga computers, and all the personal computers I all built them myself. So technology always played an important role in my life. And I felt that in my genomic research, and I was trying to extrapolate for the next 5-6 decades working as a scientist, being optimistic, of course, here, I felt that part would be missing. So what can you do if you cannot fill into any known categories of life science scientists? You start finding out what else can you do that would merge these different personalities, would merge my clinician personality, my scientist personality, and my geek self. And as it turned out, future studies, so the science and research of potential, plausible, possible futures, that's the one where you can merge these different fields. And actually, future studies seem to be that sub part of scientific research where I can, on one day, I can zoom into a very specific field, like analyzing the impact of artificial intelligence on a certain medical specialty. But on the same day, I can zoom out and look at healthcare from a bird's eye perspective. In what else fields or research focuses or interests can you do the same? So I thought that's exactly my field. And I would try to bring in clinical life science knowledge into future studies, but nobody seemed to be doing that before. So I had to brand it to make it easier for people to understand what I am doing, what we are doing with my colleagues now and PhD students and team members around the world. So I branded it The Medical Futurist, simply implying that we are merging two fields, the evolution of technological and cultural changes in medicine and healthcare with the amazing methods of future studies. And I'm sorry for being so long about this response, but about the second part of your question about the predictions, I have been fighting so hard, against the idea that it doesn't make any sense to make predictions, because making predictions implies that there is one singular future. There's one timeline And myself as a professional researcher, a futurist, I should have a better knowledge than you do about what's going to happen next. But that couldn't be further from the case. In fact, multiple futures exist. And what we futurists can do is that we can use a bunch of established systematic methods coming from future studies for observing, discovering, and analyzing these futures. So I'm much more interested in highlighting trends for business, healthcare policymakers than making predictions for them. I'm much more interested in helping those decision and policymakers finding out the desired future for a field of interest or hospital or medical specialty than telling them what I think is going to happen. So still answering your question, there are a few things that I think are clearly happening now, for which when I used to mention them in my keynotes more than a decade ago at medical events, I used to spark some debates, such as patient empowerment, the idea that patients are becoming members of their medical team, the idea that the end of the digital health story is how patients are becoming the point of care. And now I think part of these, again, predictions is that artificial intelligence as a technological entity will join that medical team now consisting of patients and all sorts of medical professionals.
Well, I think you did a great job of answering the question because it was a difficult question. And sometimes when you ask someone like to summarize their PhD thesis, it's like you're really asking for trouble. And if I mischaracterize what a futurist is, that makes it even worse. And you brought it back to the predictions because also, although the futurist is not about predictions, it doesn't mean you're not allowed to ever make a prediction so that you don't go off brand. So thank you for that. I will consider it a very concise answer to the question and apologize for my role in perpetuating any misconceptions about what your role is.
And David, please, I didn't want to, say these things about that, but it's very important that we just put this discussion on the table that future studies are not about predicting the future, but about analyzing those potential futures. And you might think it's a very simple thing to say out loud, but I come across these discussions so often talking with business leaders, government officials, even patient and physician leaders that they think, well, I should be able to tell them what's going to happen next. And I'm happy to tell them what I think could happen next. But I also tell them that it doesn't matter. Because what if 9 out of 10 of the predictions I make would turn out to be right, but then if one is wrong and, by statistics, I will have wrong predictions, then what do you do with my next prediction? Well, what kind of role will it play in your decision-making process? And hopefully you will have doubts. And that's why in the last 2 years or so, one of the major efforts or focuses in my whole research and science communication efforts have been about focusing on how to bring futures methods for the masses so that anyone can start using these futures, at least some of the basic, of course, futures methods. So then we could talk about the future in a different sense, almost with the same consistency and self-confidence as we have when we talk about the past, because we all study history lessons and we all talk about legends and stories and from our childhood. So we have quite an experience talking about the past, but not so much about the future. So I've been trying to change that while also focusing on, of course, the future of medicine and healthcare. So it's absolutely not your fault. I think it's a population level issue that we have almost zero relationship with the future.
So let's talk about some of the digital health trends and technologies that are exciting today. Of course, AI has got to be one of them, but sometimes it feels like it's really the only thing. Are there some other non-AI technologies that are important today?
Absolutely. I think some trends are not even technological ones, just the idea that now patients and physicians and technological entities will work in one team. I think it's quite unprecedented in the history of medicine. But if I have to pinpoint one particular technological trend, then recently I've been quite excited about PPG, photoplethysmography, the technology that our smartwatches use to measure heart rate and blood oxygen levels. But the same technology could be used to measure a few other quite important health parameters, vital signs, or even biomarkers, from blood glucose levels to blood pressure. And just the idea that we could shape blood pressure management by not giving patients digital blood pressure monitors, but they could wear chest patches or they could wear their smartwatches without even, realizing that they are wearing it. And the smartwatch or the chest patch could measure blood pressure continuously. And there are now existing examples for each. Even some of them are being proven through peer-reviewed studies. Now, that would be quite a life changer for actually hundreds of millions of patients dealing with high blood pressure. So PPG, I think, shows more promise than we normally think.
Great. Okay, that sounds interesting. Let's come back a little bit to the discussion about how technology is changing the relationships between physicians and patients, and it comes back to some of your earlier, if not predictions, discussions about the empowered patient and so on. Now, a lot of what's happened in medicine can have some unforeseen circumstances, at least in the U.S. healthcare system, where what seems to be, wow, that could reduce costs or improve quality, may just be a business opportunity for someone to insert themselves into the system, to add costs, and not necessarily be looking after either the patient or the physician. So how do you see the role of technology in the evolving doctor-patient relationship? And are we headed more in the good direction or a bad one?
I think it's necessarily a good direction because when we talk about the role of technologies in healthcare in general, I always feel like the discussion is about whether we choose to reach out to this influx or range of advanced technologies because we have a choice. We can decide not to reach out to them, but that's not the case. So healthcare today faces a very basic mathematical problem. About 6 million healthcare workers are missing today. The World Health Organization shared that data a few years ago. And by 2030, 10 million healthcare workers will be missing worldwide. So we can conclude that we will never train as many healthcare professionals as we need, while the number of patients requiring our constant medical help will keep on rising not because we're getting sicker, but because we're getting better at diagnosing patients and monitoring them and treating them on the long term, especially in the case of chronic conditions. So while healthcare is improving, that number is going to get bigger. There is a huge niche between how many physicians and medical professionals we can train and how many patients need their help. That gap cannot be filled in with simple HR tricks. That gap can only be filled in with advanced technologies. So I wanted to make sure that we talk about this issue from that perspective, that of course it's always better for a patient to be able to meet a physician in person and they can build a relationship, using empathy and compassion and trust. But that is gradually becoming a luxury for most of us worldwide. So instead of that, technology could be the lifesaver, but it's extremely hard to include that in that process because we are talking about, patients' lives are at stake, first of all, and then we are talking about people having relationships with other people. And technology always has a very complicated role in that. So that's why for about 1.5 decades, we have been publishing papers, and I've been trying to use all my channels in science communication to talk as much about it as possible, that why we are witnessing an influx of advanced technologies. At its core, digital health is a cultural transformation of healthcare, because the way the traditional hierarchy of the doctor-patient relationship has been transforming into an eco-level partnership, which is coming with its own rules and new ways of forming relationships and building trust. So all this is happening because of technologies, but the cultural component of that change is much more impactful than which wearable sensor, smartwatch, or AI algorithm comes out this year. And the sooner, I think, healthcare systems, governments, business leaders acknowledge the power of this cultural transformation, I think the better decisions they can make. Just to give you a real life example, I've given countless keynotes at medical events to my peers, and 10 years ago, I had so many fights with them and debates about why they thought that I was talking about AI and digital technologies taking over their roles and their responsibilities, while it couldn't be further from the case. The fact was that they had fears, and these physicians rejected the use of advanced technologies, not because they thought that based on peer-reviewed studies, they chose not to use them, but because they had primal feelings about them, emotions like having anxiety about using those technologies, or fears about privacy, or even fears about being replaced in their very important doctor-patient relationship. So in these cases, we cannot just focus on pushing the technologies on them, but we have to focus on finding out why they reject that technology, why they have anxiety about that, and then working on those parts before even discussing any specific technologies in that relationship. And one of my PhD students published a study about all these emotions from fear through anxiety and even resistance and rejection, and how the use of digital health technologies and AI can create these emotions in physicians and what we can do about these. So I think if we can focus on the cultural components first, then we get into a better position of finding out which technologies to include in the doctor-patient relationship that will hopefully improve it and not diminish it.
It's very interesting if you go beyond even what you're describing to the broader perspective and think about how there's this shortage that we always hear about in medicine of physicians and others, whereas in other fields there's a concern about unemployment. AI is going to take everybody's job, where it's really, hey, actually we're looking to fill some jobs here. And one way that the jobs have been filled in the rich countries, in particular the US, but also in Europe, is through immigration, which on the one hand is great, but on the other hand, some people are moving from middle income or lower income countries to the US, and it's exacerbating the shortages that they may have somewhere else. And so the whole tie with immigration policy, technology, culture, patient expectations, I think is very broad, and you filled in an important part related to culture there as well.
Almost a decade ago, there were investors and technology company leaders, and I don't want to name names for a reason. I think you guess who I'm talking about. And they had predictions, very, very much predictions about how radiology would get obsolete in a few years, how AI would replace that every physician in that medical specialty. And then there's a meme, about how self-driving cars will become a thing and how AI will replace radiologists. And in the newest picture, it's 2026, and radiologists are going to work in their self-driving cars, because that shows exactly what has been happening to that specific medical specialty, which actually has many tasks that will be prone to automation, because some of those tasks are either data-based, image-based, or repetitive. So those tasks are prone to automation, but it doesn't mean that the medical specialty will get vanished from the palette of medical specialties. It only means that radiologists will have to do fewer and fewer tasks, which are repetitive and data-based, and some of their precious time will be freed up to work on even more AI-based technologies that can help them do even more jobs. So these predictions described how the specialty would get obsolete, while it's in the, I think, top three, the most wanted residents of all the medical specialties in the United States, and one of the best paid medical specialties too. So obviously it's not going away. If not, it's becoming one of the top success rates among all the medical specialties. So it's very easy as an investor, as a financial or technological person, to come up with predictions so easily, because indeed, if you check the FDA's list of all the FDA approved and cleared AI-based medical technologies, you will find that 85% of all of them are focusing on radiology, which might make you think that, so then that specialty will get replaced. But the fact the reality is more about how their individual tasks will change over time. So then maybe we have to start teaching prompt engineering to radiologists very specifically. I think to every other physician too, but specifically radiologists, because they will start working with more and more generative AI based interfaces, because they will keep on developing AI that can take care of even more tasks and scans, and will flag those that should still be checked by human physicians. So it's called partial automation, and radiology is the prime example for that.
So as long as we're picking on radiologists, let's continue, because I think there's a lot to say culturally there. So when, and I'll pick on radiologists, even though some of my friends are radiologists. So one thing I always joked about is when you meet a radiologist, they usually tell you how much money they're making and when they're going to retire. And then there's also quick to look at the threats. Before AI, it was about other specialties doing imaging and why they shouldn't do that. And the radiologist generally doesn't have a relationship with the patient so much. So it's more, if you want doctor-patient relationship, people are rarely talking about the relationship with their radiologist. But then, and you talk about it being an attractive specialty. We talk about the road specialties. I think radiology, orthopedics, anesthesiology, and dermatology, which are high paid and you don't have to work that hard. So those continue to be sought after. But the And then this whole element as it ties into job loss and the type of analysis you're talking about. So you start with these predictions and say, well, 70% of the job can be done by technology, and therefore 70% of the jobs are going to be gone. Not necessarily, right? It may be that the job changes and maybe even need more people. So I'm glad you brought up radiology.
Absolutely. You mentioned that you don't have to work that hard. I have a friend who is an anesthesiologist, and he just came into my mind. Of course, I know what you meant by that. Absolutely, that's the point. That even though, let's say that actually 70% of their tasks could be prone to automation, it doesn't mean that what's left is nothing and they will lose their jobs. But it means, well, they can use their absolute medical expertise and experience to work on something. So maybe we can do 3 times more radiology scans in the next 5 years because AI will take care of so many relatively easier tasks that are, low risk decisions. And of course, AI will keep on getting better at that without taking breaks or without having bad days. Plus, they will learn from every single mistake they make, and no human brain can physically compete with that power and efficiency. But in the meantime, radiologists will work on other AI-based technologies. Plus, I think it opens so many new doors. Like in the case of the MRI machine, it would be possible to just a patient go through the machine in 5 minutes instead of spending 25 for like a heart MRI. And the machine could analyze the scan, but there would be no image to be analyzed. Because the AI doesn't need the image to be seen. It just needs the data and the spin directions coming out from the machine. We people need the scan so we can look at something that we understand. And for me, far the most exciting aspect of using AI in these specialties is not just how it changes certain tasks and how it replaces repetitive and database components of their jobs, but how AI will find unusual associations we, clinicians, physicians could have never found in other ways. Like there was a study not so long ago showing that an AI could detect a skin color from chest X-rays. And there were no data, no text, no details about the patient on the chest X-rays, just the X-rays themselves. We physicians think it's impossible to be able to do that, but AI finds something that we don't understand. Or how there was another study showing that just looking at or listening into vocal recordings, phone recordings of patients, it could detect the risk of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. We thought maybe scientifically it's possible, but we couldn't, find out the way of doing that. But AI finds something that we don't. And that's why I always say that, and even published a paper about why the real era of the art of medicine will come with AI. It's not that AI is taking away that art of medicine from us now, but when AI finds treatments, cures, diagnostic procedures that we couldn't find for centuries in, very smart people looking for those potential solutions in research and clinics and all these. And if we will find something, then we will have to understand how it came to that conclusion that we couldn't find any other ways. And we will need the real art of medicine from knowledge in, pathology, all the medical specialties, how AI works, to try to reason with the AI machine, finding out how it could find something that we couldn't. That's, I think, the most exciting part of AI these days.
I'm going to suggest something, and you can say if it's nonsense. So, when you hear some of the like old school physicians talk about what things used to be like, so before they had, the CT scans and ultrasound and all sorts of imaging and advanced tests that you could do, and sort of the art of laying on hands and being able to listen and hear things. And sometimes you hear the older physicians say, hey, today's physicians, they don't know anything except how to order a test. They get their result. Are we talking about potentially getting to the next era? So instead of the laying on hands, or just saying there's an output and I'll just take it, to actually come back to kind of like reasoning, but like maybe a more advanced form of laying on hands and really having to engage with it in a more sophisticated way?
I don't think so. And I don't think that should be the case. I mean, it's going to happen, but I see it from a different perspective, not such an observation being applied to every medical professional, but I think primary, and it might be a long shot. And that's now a prediction. I cannot yet back these up with medical studies. I think primary care will be entirely AI based. Simply not because we choose that it works this way, but because that's the only chance we have to keep on providing or receiving care. So Primary care will be a line of AI agents, chatbots, conversational agents, large language models, generative AI in general, working as the primary care physicians that we have today. And in the primary care line, everyone will have access to these because it's the easiest, cheapest, much easier to give access to a large language model than to help someone get access to a medical professional, either remotely or in person. And the secondary line will be what we call now primary care. And the third line will be what we call now secondary care. Because everyone, and as soon as a patient realizes that in every single parts of their lives, from banking to transportation, from commerce to ordering books online, they always reach out to digital technologies, and everything is simple through that way. Once they realize that actually they can do the same about their own health, now ChatGPT has ChatGPT Health, Claude has Claude Health. So obviously these large language models started launching their own health-related versions, which cannot replace a physician. But let's be honest, when hundreds of millions of patients ask questions to these large language models about their disease, treatments, diagnosis, and health in general, then it makes more sense for those companies to develop health-related versions too. Medical ones will be coming too, only trained on medical databases and medical textbooks. So it's understandable. And as patients will reach out to information, this is the evolution we are looking at. And as a futurist, I'm always interested in analyzing the evolution of technology. So very briefly, 20 something years ago, it used to be what I call doctor neighbor, that patients went home after a doctor patient visit and they discussed the medications they got, the prescriptions, the diagnostic procedures with their neighbors, their friends, their families. In the early 21st century, we got Dr. Google. Everyone started doing searches on Google about diseases and treatments. And I'm sure you can remember how many debates and discussions there were about from physicians and professors around the world about why patients shouldn't do that, even though it was understandable that they reached out to the simplest information resource out there. And now it's the era of Dr. AI, when we can not just search for information, we can have discussions about the information. We can bring in medical test results and discharge summaries and ask AI to help analyze it and help us digest the information in it. We can ask questions. We can ask what questions we should ask at the next doctor-patient meeting. So now that's the evolution we are looking through, and it's inevitable that patients will keep on reach out to these. The question is how we physicians can deal with that, whether we understand our new role, which is not being a key holder to the ivory tower of medicine, but being a guide in this jungle of AI and digital information coming from wearables and websites and social media and search engines and all these. And we have to act as the guide because patients will keep reaching out to us for help, for guidance, and we need to be able to provide them with that.
Can you talk about proactive medicine and the role of agentic AI in that?
Absolutely. I think most of the things I learned about being proactive in health is coming from e-patient Dave DeBronkart. He's the most famous e-patient in the world, a very good friend of mine. He was just in Budapest visiting us, giving a talk at the first scientific symposium about medical future studies. And he was my international top speaker at the end of the line. So we were very happy to have a patient giving a scientific speech at the Hungarian Academy of Sciences. And he always talks about proactivity in a way that physicians usually imply that if we let patients, then they can finally access information resources only we physicians could access for centuries within the ivory tower of medicine. And e-patient Dave always tells me that they don't need our permission to have this autonomy over the information they can finally access. So I think from that sense, proactivity for me just means that, of course, I reach out to information resources, to channels, to whatever data I can or insights I can obtain if it leads to me trying to be in a better position to improve my health or disease management. And proactivity from that sense is that I'm not waiting for a symptom to appear and only after that go to ask for medical help at the physical point of care, but I am proactive already. I want to live a long and healthy life. I want to dedicate efforts, time, privacy, money, anything needed to that. But then I will need a medical professional to get sense of the data, to help me find out how to use these AI chatbots, to learn prompt engineering. So it's a very complicated ecosystem, which used to be about, very briefly, of course, I'm trying to summarize, 30 years of research in a few lines, but there was an ivory tower of medicine. Every information, data, peer support, second opinion was inside of it with medical professionals too. And the patients were outside and they were waiting for a symptom. And when they needed medical help, when something was wrong already, no prevention here, then they had to enter the ivory tower. They were told what to do, and then they left. And about half of them kept on complying with the treatment. You cannot show me an industry with a lower efficiency rate than what healthcare has in general. But now, because of proactivity, it's different. It's patients who are leading the narrative. They are the ones reaching out to wearables and digital health tools and apps and AI chatbots, whatever information channels and resources they can have access to. And then they need our help in guiding through the process, the so-called jungle of healthcare, which is full of decisions, big ones about, medicine, smaller ones, lifestyle choices day by day. And they need this guidance. So the medical team is still there, but the cultural components behind it have changed dramatically. Because now it's not, as a physician, I'm telling patients what to do, and then we don't meet again. But we are sitting at the same table, we are looking at the same interfaces, and that's new to each of these stakeholders. And we have to find our new ways of building relationships and creating, trust along the process.
You mentioned Dave DeBronkart, ePatient Dave, and I remember the first time that I met him, he was just newly into it, and it was in the era of the first Google Health. And I remember he stood up at a small conference where we were, and he says, "I'm your worst nightmare, a patient with a blog." And he started to describe how, I think it was the Beth Israel had allowed his data to be exported to Google Health, and it analyzed it, and it saw all these different things he was being tested for, and which were ruled out. But it concluded that he had all these things. So that was kind of the early days. But I do remember that, and it's good to know that he's continuing to walk this earth and to do well, because that wasn't the path he was on originally. So good for him. So let's go back and talk a little bit more about wearables. You already talked about the potential for them for blood pressure. Early, when I'm thinking about when you had blood glucose monitoring, and patient might bring some data, and the physician didn't know what to do with it, even though they saw it was relevant, and they were also afraid to get more of a real-time feed because, well, now, if something goes wrong and it's out of range, I'm responsible for it. Now there's much more data, and potentially even much more on top of that. How bring me up to speed on what's changed since those early days of kind of the printouts of your blood pressure or your blood glucose to now all the data we're dealing with.
There are several things that are extremely different today than it was not 10 or 15, but even 5 years ago. First of all, sleep tracking used to be something for the geek and the nerdy people like myself, while I think smart sleep alarms are living through a golden age. And I still think that the smart sleep alarm is the holy grail of health tracking. If anyone asks me, because I've been going through quite a longevity journey myself, having, I think, more than 300 different medical tests and examinations and multiple blood markers and all these genomic tests, microbiomes and hardware-based devices too. If someone wants to do something great about their health, start use a smart sleep alarm, because that will change their life. They will wake up feeling energized because a smart sleep alarm will wake them up every morning from a light sleep and not from deep sleep. And there might be 5 minutes in between the two stages, but you cannot tell because you are asleep. Your smartwatch can, because it analyzes data and it can make that very simple decision. And then there is one gentle vibration from the smartwatch and you're awake, feeling energized, no snooze is needed. And so that's far the best option for everyone out there. And that has changed a lot. And I think it's much more widespread than it used to be. Second, about 5-10 years ago, using wearables for health purposes was still like for a niche population. And now at the Medical Futurist, we actually checked, based on data statistics worldwide, more than 1 billion people worldwide have at least one device that can measure a vital sign or a health parameter. A third thing I think is about HRV, heart rate variability. Even now when I wake up and I check my sleep quality, besides, of course, how I'm feeling in the morning, I always check my HRV because that's the best indicator of not only that night's sleep quality, but how I'm doing on the long term too. In general, or very briefly, the lower your resting heart rate is while sleeping, the higher your HRV can be, and it gives a good picture about your fitness stage or level in general. It shows. I think it's the best number today about sleep quality. So HRV has become like the of utmost importance these days. I also tell people that find a hobby or something you like to do during which you have a low resting heart rate. For example, for me, it's watching baseball. If I watch baseball, it's gonna have an amazing impact on my mental health and on my health in general, because my resting heart rate will go down, and I will just immerse myself in watching the Angels lose again day by day, because I was silly enough to choose that team some few years ago as my favorite team. So that's it. So I think in general, what has changed is the amount of insights we can get from these variables, not just the pure data, because what do you do with the data? And even what can your primary care physician do with the data? I've tried mine many times, and sometimes my primary care physician told me that, look, I don't know the answer to your question about these variables, but let's come and sit next to me. Let's do a search online together. Let's find out the answer together. And I think that's what wearables can really do, that it can bring together physicians and patients and help strengthen their relationship, their bond, while the physician being able to say out loud, look, I don't know, but we can find out together. And I think the most successful wearables today provide not just pure data, but insights. And even some of these have large language models built in. So I can even have discussions about my insights and data with those generative AI interfaces. So that's the direction I think we are moving towards.
You mentioned briefly genomics and the microbiome. What's the current status, and how are those evolving in terms of the information you can get, the insight, and the actual difference it could make to a patient?
The reason why I'm smiling is that the field has evolved amazingly, and from a whole genome sequencing service, from a microbiome service, you can learn a lot. I learned what medications would cause me serious side effects, so I have to avoid them. I learned what medical conditions or cancer types I have a risk for, so I can take preventive measures. It's extremely useful. But I'm smiling because when anyone is asking me, well, which service I should reach out to, which genetic testing service I should use, I cannot suggest them even one. I've had many. I've had, I think, 8 or 9 genetic tests with different companies. Some of these since then went bankrupt or stopped providing health insights. 23andMe is a good example about having all these changes around their company structure. One UK-based company, which I loved because the insights were very useful, turned out that their leaders, the 2 CEOs, left the country and brought all the data, all the genomic data with them. So we don't even have access to our own genomic reports anymore. So there is not one service I can wholeheartedly suggest or recommend to anyone, even though the field itself it's blooming and there's so much information to exploit from our genomic data. Yet it's extremely hard for an average individual to get access to those interpretations.
Let's go back to something you talked about earlier about how the access to physicians, just to paraphrase, is becoming kind of a luxury good. It's not generally available. And then I've heard you talk about 300 tests you had and 8 or 9 genetic tests. And so on the one hand, what I'm hearing is that those who are very sophisticated, have financial access and know how to work with the system, it may be kind of an ultra luxury kind of approach. And those are maybe the same people who can access the physicians and leaders that have the new art of medicine. On the other hand, they're also talking about the sort of technologies that can democratize this by bringing it out of the ivory tower and giving the average person incredible access to information. How do we reconcile those 2 things? Are they both happening at the same time? Does one overwhelm the other?
Absolutely. It's quite the elephant in the room. But I look at digital health, AI, and longevity services from different perspectives. Digital health, of course, is the oldest out of these 3. And in that, I think in the digital health revolution, the biggest issue first was not even about money, but about the ability to analyze the data. So the geekier you were, the higher a chance you had to analyze the data. And if the system wasn't even working for geek people like me, who were willing to, sacrifice privacy, money, efforts, dedication, and time into using these wearables, and even I couldn't benefit from using them in my general healthcare system, then how could I expect the same to happen to hundreds of millions of patients out there? But now it has matured a lot, and regarding a lot of smartphone apps and wearable sensors, at-home lab tests, I think many of these have become accessible to the masses, even some of these being reimbursed in the US, in Germany. So there are amazing examples for that, at least because that's where digital health is in its own maturity process. With AI, it's a bit different. It's younger, but generative AI agents, not agents, the large language models are freely accessible, and at about 1 billion people, I almost said patients, 1 billion people use them on a weekly basis. But to access the paid versions, or to have access to very complicated versions, I don't see the benefit that much. So it doesn't mean that if I can buy the biggest tools out there, AI tools out there, then I will benefit 3, 4, 5 times more in my health. That's not the case for now. So generative AI has become, since the launch of ChatGPT in 2022, quite a big driver of making this information source accessible to the masses. But longevity is different. And I'm talking about not the kind of longevity that has been around for decades, waiting for a miracle drug that could either reverse aging or make aging into a chronic condition we can treat. But I'm talking about practical longevity. All these longevity packages that you can buy at companies, and then they will measure everything about you and do all the medical tests. I had such one of these tests last year with a company. Offered me a package worth more than $25,000. Of course, I said yes. I wanted to see what it looks like in practice, and from the inside, I had 50 plus medical examinations, genome sequencing, microbiome profiling, dietary tests, more than 300 blood biomarkers, anything you can imagine. They measure it about me, and then it took them 8 hours to tell me in 4 settings to tell me what's wrong. And they told me if I'm in excellent health, but if they wanted to give me all the positive information, it would have taken 3 or 4 days. So we will only focus on what might be wrong or might go wrong later. So imagine someone getting access to that test for $25,000. It's not not the kind of choice whether I buy a wearable sensor so I might benefit from it for my cardiac health, but if I buy a car or a longevity package for the next few years, it's a vastly different decision. So yes, I think I'm afraid that practical longevity is very much accessible now for the wealthiest groups or individuals. But I remain positive that as it has changed with the majority of digital health, and it has changed with how AI has become more accessible to the masses, hopefully prices will go down in a similar way. If we are trying to remain positive here, whole genome sequencing service used to cost about $70,000 15, 16 years ago. And now I think for a few hundred, maybe $200, $300, $400, it's possible to have a whole genome sequencing service. So I expect the same to happen with all these 3 fields.
So here's my last question. You're an advisor to hospitals, governments, large companies on how to interpret the future, what to expect, where medicine is headed. And so if a health system CEO is listening in today, as they tend to do, and they're trying to figure out, okay, what should I focus on, not in 5 years, but this year, where should I be focusing? What do you suggest?
What a fair question to ask a futurist to focus on one single thing. Because now I have an internal debate in my mind between 2 things. I thought you would say, but I cannot say anything about AI because, we talked about AI so much. Because prompt engineering is the first thing that comes to mind. I think that the reason why, and I'm always interested as the medical futurist in the reason why, not just highlighting a trend, but why do we have to acknowledge that trend? So it's in this discussion, AI is not important. What's important is that there will be, thousands more times more AI-based technologies in for medical and health purposes. We cannot expect all the stakeholders of healthcare to learn to use all of them. It's physically impossible. Not even for me, and I'm an AI researcher, I cannot learn to use all the AI tools in the technical details, but I can very much learn to use one interface with which I can have human-like conversations, and that interface will translate my ideas, my thoughts, my questions into the language of those different types of AI-based medical technologies. I think even for hospitals, physicians will keep on having discussions with one large language model, and that model will help them have discussions with the AI being used by the radiology department, the AI being used by the electronic medical records, the one that the patient brings in that comes with the smartphone connected ECG. So all these range of AI-based technologies, the interface between them and between medical professionals and patients will be a large language model. So the better we can use them, the better we can exploit all of these AI-based devices. And prompt engineering is the ability to ask the right questions, to share the right conditions and circumstances with these large language models to get the best outcomes. But the internal debate I had in my mind is that this is very AI specific. And if I could advise a CEO or a hospital leader to do something that's not technology related, then please start using futures methods. So you won't need futurists like me to tell you which trends to be excited about or which trends to fear, because you don't need people. You have been using futures methods like the futures wheel, scenario analysis, vision writing, horizon scanning yourself within your team, within your organization. So of course, you know which futures might be possible for your team or your company. Of course, you know which one is the desired future. You even backcasted towards today, finding out which steps, legal, scientific, technological, financial steps we have to start making from today to have a higher chance to reach the desired future, and not the other ones around. So just by using a few basic futures methods, I think every hospital, organization, healthcare institution would be in a much better position to anticipate, not predict, to anticipate what could happen next. And they could design strategies, they could take preventive measures about preparing for most of these. And then I think it takes a lot of anxiety and fear out of the equation when you know what kind of futures you have to be prepared for.
Well, that's it for yet another episode of the Health Biz Podcast. I'm David Williams, president of Health Business Group. My guest today has been Dr. Bertalan Meskó. He is founder and director of the Medical Futurist Institute. If you like what you heard and you don't mind that I picked on the radiologist and the anesthesiologist, please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. And Bertalan, thank you so much for joining me today.
The pleasure was all mine. Thank you so much, David.